There's a $3.7 trillion market sitting right in front of us. And yet, if you look at the broader culture, everyone is completely obsessed with building, the next consumer photo sharing app.
Right. It's all about the shiny new consumer toy.
Exactly. So today, we are ignoring that whole mythology of the teenagers in the garage writing code for teenagers. Instead, I want to welcome you to a really intense deep dive into the hidden mechanical realities of how massive corporate empires are being systematically overthrown.
And we have some incredible source material for this. We're pulling from internal lectures and raw insights from the architects of this shift. People like Aaron Levy from Box,
Right.
growth engineers like Alex Schultz and Kevin Hale, and operational insights from Sam Altman.
Yeah, we are unpacking the raw structural shifts governing enterprise software, the brutal mathematics of retention engineering, and the highly engineered world of distribution and SEO. So, for everyone listening, our mission here isn't just to talk about starting a business.
No, not at all.
It's about understanding how trillion-dollar industries are toppled by a few lines of code and a really deep understanding of human behavior.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the scale of what we're talking about is just mind-blowing.
It really is a critical pivot in perspective. I mean, most people just misunderstand where the leverage actually lies in technology. The consumer space is highly visible, right? It dominates the cultural zeitgeist. It produces the household game.
Right, the brands we use every day.
Exactly. But when you looked at the raw data from people like Aaron Livy, who literally architected this shift, you realize the consumer space is essentially a knife fight in a phone booth compared to what happens inside the enterprise.
Let's break down Levy's math on this, because the sheer scale is what makes this so high tension. If you take the entire consumer tech space, all the consumer e-commerce, all the global advertising revenue supporting those free social media platforms, you are looking at a market size of roughly $170 billion annually.
Which sounds huge. It sounds massive. That is a massive pie. But then you look at enterprise IT spending, the servers, the infrastructure, the networking, the supply chain management software that actually runs the global economy. That market is $3.7 trillion every single year.
Yeah. The delta between those two numbers dictates entirely different business strategies. In the consumer market, you're fighting tooth and nail for a tiny slice of that $170 billion. And your target demographic is a user who intrinsically wants your product to be free.
Oh, absolutely. The consumer value equation is incredibly stingy. I mean, a user will sit through unskippable ads or hand over all their personal data just to avoid paying 99 cents for an app. The friction to monetize a consumer is monumental.
Right, because consumers want to spend as little as possible. But the enterprise value equation operates on an entirely different plane of logic. Enterprises do not view software as a cost center. They view it as a lever to increase productivity.
So it's an investment for them.
Exactly. Think about it. If an engineering firm spends $200,000 on a piece of logistical software, but that software eliminates supply chain bottlenecks and saves them $2 million a year in operational waste, that isn't a purchase. It's an arbitrage opportunity.
Wow. Yeah, they will deploy capital all day long if the ROI is demonstrably positive.
They absolutely will.
But historically, young developers wanted absolutely nothing to do with that $3.7 trillion market. Building enterprise software was considered, the most unsexy, soul-crushing path a founder could take.
Totally unsexy.
And the reason for that aversion was a gatekeeper.
Right.
A structural archetype from the 90s and early 2000s that the sources jokingly refer to as Chuck with a briefcase.
Ah, Chuck with a briefcase. He represents the legacy enterprise sales motion. Because in that era, you couldn't simply build a superior piece of software and put it on the internet for people to download. Software deployment required a massive, localized physical footprint.
You had to actually go to the company.
Right, so you had to hire a literal army of sales representatives, the Chucks. Chuck's job was to fly to corporate headquarters, take the chief information officer to a steak dinner, play a round of golf, and navigate a procurement process that could easily take 18 to 24 months.
And the crazy part is the CIO buying the software wasn't even the person who had to use it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The CIO was buying based on a checklist of features, security compliance, and vendor reputation. The actual end user, like the data entry clerk or the mid-level manager, had zero agency in the decision.
They just got told, hey, this is the software we use now. Good luck.
Yeah, And because they had no agency, the software companies had zero incentive to design a beautiful, intuitive user interface. They built software to appease the buyer, not the user.
Right.
Furthermore, once Chuck finally closed the deal, the friction was really just beginning. Implementing a legacy enterprise system meant consultants living on-site for a year, installing custom hardware, writing bespoke integrations for the company's lockdown servers. It was capital-intensive, slow, and incredibly rigid.
Which means the barrier to entry was practically insurmountable. I mean, if you were a small startup, you couldn't afford a global sales force to take CIOs golfing. And you definitely couldn't afford the physical deployment infrastructure.
It was a walled garden.
But that entire model has been vaporized. And it wasn't vaporized because those legacy companies suddenly woke up and decided to be more innovative. It was destroyed by raw underlying structural shifts in technology.
3 specific cascading shifts, to be exact. These forces altered the fundamental physics of the market. The first was the transition from on-premise computing to the cloud.
Right, getting rid of the server room.
Exactly. We moved from a paradigm where every single corporation had to buy physical servers, allocate real estate for them, cool them, and hire huge teams to maintain them, to a world of centralized, on-demand compute power. Amazon Web Services, Azure, Google Cloud.
They turned computing into a utility, like electricity. You only pay for the exact bandwidth and processing power you actually consume.
Yes. It shifted corporate accounting from massive upfront capital expenditures to highly manageable operational expenditures. And for the startup trying to disrupt the space, it meant they didn't need $10 million in venture capital just to buy servers before writing their first line of code. They could spin up an AWS instance for a few dollars.
So the barrier to entry just plummeted overnight.
It plummeted, which enabled the second shift, the rise of global platforms. Because the software was now hosted in the cloud, the distribution model fundamentally changed.
Because you're not shipping CDs anymore.
Right. A 2-person team could write a piece of code once, deploy it to the cloud, and instantly serve a boutique marketing agency in London and a massive automotive manufacturer in Detroit simultaneously. The era of bespoke, on-site physical installation was over.
But wait, the cloud and global platforms only made it easier for the startup to build and host the software. It didn't solve the Chuck with the briefcase problem. It didn't solve how you actually get the CIO to buy it.
That is the critical missing piece.
Right. That required a catalyst to fundamentally bypass the gatekeepers. And that brings us to the third shift, the proliferation of mobile devices.
The smartphone is the ultimate catalyst of this entire disruption. When you put 2 billion highly capable, internet-connected supercomputers into the pockets of the global workforce, the balance of power completely shifts. IT was historically IT-led. The technology department dictated the tools. But the smartphone made technology user-led.
So what does this all mean for the startup? It sounds like you're no longer storming the castle gates to sell to the king. You're basically smuggling the product into the castle in the pockets of the peasants.
That is exactly what is happening. It's a phenomenal mechanism for infiltration. Consider a modern sales team out in the field. The legacy CRM software the CIO bought 5 years ago is clunky, requires a VPN to access, and takes 10 minutes to log a single client interaction.
It's terrible to use.
Right. So what does a salesperson do? They go to the App Store on their personal phone, download a sleek, cloud-based CRM startups app, and just start tracking their leads there.
Because their compensation is tied to closing deals, not adhering to clunky IT protocols, they just choose the path of least resistance.
Exactly. Then they invite the rest of their team to the app. Then the regional manager wants to see the data, so they adopt it too. Suddenly, you have 300 people in a massive corporation relying daily on a piece of software that the IT department never vetted, never approved, and never bought.
I've heard this called shadow IT.
Shadow IT, yes. And at that point, the startup has unparalleled leverage. They aren't cold calling the CIO begging for a meeting. They're sending an automated email to the CIO saying, hey, 300 of your employees are currently hosting proprietary corporate data on our unsecured free tier.
Oh, wow. So it's like a ransom almost.
Well, a polite ransom. They say, would you like to pay for the enterprise license so you can implement security controls and single sign-on?
It totally forces the hand of the executive. The adoption has already happened. The purchase is merely a retroactive formalization of what the users already chose.
And for anyone listening, whenever you see a massive gap between what is technically possible and how an old industry actually operates, that gap is an arbitrage opportunity to exploit. The legacy companies were still playing the steak dinner sales game, while the infrastructure had already shifted to user-led cloud adoption.
But I want to actively push back on this for a second, because realizing the door's unlocked doesn't mean you can just walk in and claim the throne.
Fair point.
If I'm building a cloud-based CRM, I am still ultimately competing against Salesforce or Oracle or Microsoft. These are behemoths with billions in cash reserves and thousands of engineers. If they see me gaining traction, why don't they just replicate my sleek mobile app and crush me with their distribution advantage?
Because a frontal assault against an incumbent is suicidal. If you attempt to build feature parity, if you try to match Oracle feature for feature, you will run out of capital long before you succeed. You don't fight them head on. You use asymmetrical warfare, specifically a strategy known as the wedge.
The wedge, meaning starting intentionally small.
Exactly. Incumbents will always try to sell a massive, full-suite solution. Startups win by finding a tiny sliver of a problem and making the user experience absolutely flawless. And what's fascinating here is that starting small is actually a defensive mechanism. By the time the giant incumbent realizes you're a threat, your wedge has already secured the customer base.
Let's look at a concrete example from the sources. Zen Payroll, which eventually became Gusto. They didn't launch by announcing they were going to replace entire corporate human resources departments.
No, if they had pitched themselves as a comprehensive HR suite, the incumbents would have leveraged their massive feature lists to squash them instantly. Instead, Zen Payroll looked at small businesses and identified a singular high-friction bottleneck: the actual mechanical act of paying people.
And payroll is a total nightmare. It's not just moving money. You're dealing with state tax withholding, federal tax remittance, specialized local municipal taxes, workers' compensation. The back-end complexity is staggering.
It is. So Zen Payroll built a wedge by abstracting all of that horrific back-end complexity behind a consumer-grade, beautifully designed digital interface. They handle the tax compliance and the municipal filings automatically. They reduced an agonizing monthly chore into a seamless 5-minute digital experience.
They didn't solve HR. They just attacked paying people.
Exactly. And once you have the trust of the business owner on a critical function like payroll, introducing the next feature like managing health benefits is a remarkably easy upsell. You drive the wedge in and then you expand.
But there is an even more aggressive form of asymmetrical warfare, which is exploiting structural asymmetries, doing what incumbents physically cannot or will not do because it destroys their own economic model.
Zenefits is the absolute masterclass here. They build a cloud-based HR platform. But instead of charging a monthly licensing fee per employee, which was the lifeblood of traditional enterprise software, Zenefits gave it away completely for free.
Which is economically impossible for traditional software companies. If you're an incumbent with thousands of sales reps who need commission checks based on software licenses, you can't drop your price to zero without destroying your own company.
You're paralyzed.
But wait, how did Zenefits make money? They have engineers in San Francisco drawing massive salaries. They have server costs.
And that is the brilliance of their asymmetry. Zenefits wasn't really playing the software licensing game. They were playing the insurance brokerage game. When a small business buys health insurance, they go through a local broker who collects a recurring commission, often 5 to 8% every single year.
That is a massive hidden market.
Huge. Zenefits basically digitized that broker. They went to the small business and said, here is our top-tier HR software. It is entirely free forever. The only catch is that you must name Zenefits as your official insurance broker on the back end.
Wow. So the business pays the exact same amount for insurance, but the commission flows to Zenefits instead of the local guy.
Exactly. The software was just a Trojan horse to capture the incredibly high-margin recurring revenue of the insurance industry. The traditional software incumbents couldn't compete because they weren't legally licensed to act as insurance brokers. It was a structural checkmate.
That is so smart. And another tactic for finding these wedges is seeking out the outliers, working with customers who are essentially living in the future.
Right, the bleeding-edge customers. Skykitch is a great example of this. They didn't build generic project management software. They recognized an extreme need in heavy industries like commercial construction and mining.
Because historically, tracking a massive excavation site meant hiring a surveyor to physically walk the pit for weeks.
Right.
Yeah.
It's slow, it's dangerous, and the data is out of date by the time the report is printed. So Skykitch used drones for data capture. A drone could fly over a massive mining pit in 20 minutes and generate millimeter-accurate 3D volumetric data. They found the project managers who were desperate for real-time performance data and built the future alongside them.
Or look at PlaneGrid. They recognized that roughly $4 billion a year was being wasted in the construction industry simply printing paper blueprints and shipping them to job sites.
The friction of paper on a construction site is immense. If a subcontractor is working off yesterday's revision, they might pour concrete in the wrong location. That's a multi-million-dollar error.
Right. So the founders of PlaneGrid utilized the new iPad form factor to revolutionize construction data. They hosted blueprints in the cloud and synced them to iPads via cellular networks. Every person on the site had the master version of the blueprints in their hands at all times.
They found a massive friction point, matched it with a new piece of hardware, and drove a wedge into one of the oldest industries on Earth.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. You've used your wedge to infiltrate the enterprise, or you've launched your consumer app, but getting users is worthless if they leave. We have to shift from acquisition to the brutal mathematics of retention.
Because if a company gets this wrong, nothing else matters. You can have the greatest wedge in the world, but if the users leave after 3 days, your company is dead.
Let's break down the math of survival here. The sources talk a lot about the retention curve.
Right, the retention curve. Imagine plotting your user data on a graph. The vertical axis is the percentage of users who remain active. The horizontal axis is the number of days since those users first engaged with your product.
So on day 0, when they sign up, you're at 100%.
Exactly. But reality sets in immediately. By day 1, a significant chunk of people never open the app again. The line drops. Day 7, it drops further. Day 30, it drops again. The existential question is the trajectory of that curve over time.
Does it eventually flatten out?
That's the key. If that curve does not eventually flatten out an asymptote parallel to the x-axis, the business is default dead. It means out of every 100 people who try your product, 0 of them stick around long term.
Default dead. I mean, that's a brutal term.
It's brutal, but it's the mathematical reality. And this completely shatters the myth of growth hacking. If your product doesn't natively retain users, growth tactics are just pouring expensive water into a leaky bucket.
You're spending venture capital to acquire users who will inevitably churn.
Exactly. So to get that curve to flatten, users must experience an emotional aha moment as fast as possible. This is what the industry calls the magic moment.
The magic moment. Give me an example of that.
Facebook is the classic example. Early on, their singular goal was getting a user to 10 friends in 14 days. That was their magic moment. Seeing the faces of people you actually know in your newsfeed provided the visceral realization of the network's value.
And once they knew that metric, it dictated every engineering decision, right?
Every single one. They practically forced you to import your email contacts the moment you signed up. They didn't care about anything else until you hit that threshold. Every successful platform has one. For Airbnb, the magic moment is booking that first unique stay instead of a sterile hotel room. For eBay, it's getting paid for the first time by a complete stranger.
I love the analogy the sources use for this, comparing the user life cycle to dating versus marriage.
Oh, it's a perfect analogy.
Right. Acquiring users is like seducing someone on a first date. You focus on first impressions, aesthetics, standing out. But retention is a marriage. It's the long-term, grinding reality.
The first date tactics are fascinating, though.
Oh, absolutely. Like Vimeo, in their early fight against YouTube, they didn't just have a standard login screen. They commissioned beautiful, highly artistic, constantly changing login pages. It immediately signaled to a prospective user, hey, we are a platform built by creatives for creatives.
It was a powerful seduction technique.
Or consider the code editor, Chocolate. When a developer's free trial expired, the software didn't just show a generic error prompt. It turned their default coding font to Comic Sans.
Which is brilliant. It's the bane of existence for any design-conscious developer.
Right. It humorously pokes at their specific demographic. It proves the developers deeply understand the culture of their users. But, as you said, a brilliant first date doesn't sustain a marriage. Startups often fail at the marriage phase because of what Kevin Hale calls the broken feedback loop.
This is a structural flaw that develops in almost every successful startup as they scale. In the earliest days, the founders are writing the code and answering the customer support emails. The feedback loop is instantaneous. If you ship a bug on Friday, you spend Friday night getting yelled at by users.
It forces empathy through sheer survival instinct.
Exactly. But as the company scales, they hire a dedicated customer support team. And structurally, a massive wall is erected. The engineers are suddenly insulated. They sit in a quiet room writing code. And the support team absorbs the blow from frustrated users. The engineer never hears the confusion.
They are completely divorced from the consequences of their architecture. So how do you fix that?
You repair it through forced integration. You mandate that every single developer must do customer support, 4 to 8 hours every single week. They have to answer the phones and read the emails.
I can imagine highly paid back-end engineers absolutely revolting against that.
They absolutely hate it at first. But when an engineer has to spend 3 hours trying to explain a poorly designed feature to an exasperated user, they don't file a low-priority bug report. They walk back to their desk and fix the interface immediately. It creates a painful but highly effective feedback loop that drops churn rates significantly.
Okay, so you have a wedge in the market. You fix your feedback loops. Your product retains users. But how do you pour fuel on the fire? You don't just wait for people to find you. You build a mechanical distribution engine.
Yes, we have to dismantle the build it and they will come myth. Product quality is not a substitute for distribution strategy.
And one of the most foundational engines of distribution is SEO, or search engine optimization. Now, SEO often gets treated like dark magic, but Alex Schultz breaks it down into 3 very logical pillars. Let's start with pillar 1, keyword research.
But it's not really about the words. It's a proxy for understanding human intent. If you optimize for an intent that doesn't exist, you're building a bridge to nowhere.
There is a classic mistake he mentions in the sources about this, right? The cocktail example.
It's a painful lesson. Early in his career, Schultz spent a year optimizing a UK-based website to rank #1 on Google for the search term cocktail making. And he succeeded. He dominated the search results.
Means he won the algorithm.
He won the algorithmic battle but lost the war. Because nobody in the UK actually searches for cocktail making, they search for cocktail recipes. And in the US, they search for drink recipes. Supply, demand, and user intent must align perfectly.
That is brutal. Okay, pillar 2 is authority and links. Earning valuable links from high-authority websites like the New York Times, which acts as a vote of confidence for Google's algorithm. But earning those links is only half the battle. Pillar 3 is internal linking, distributing that link love internally.
Internal linking is the plumbing of your website. And there's an amazing anecdote from Facebook in 2007 about this. They launched public user profiles so people could be found via Google searches. But they had almost 0 SEO traffic.
The pages were essentially invisible to Google.
Right, because the directory link to all those millions of profiles was buried in a hidden footer block at the very bottom of the homepage. Google's crawlers just gave up before they found it.
So what did they do?
By simply moving that directory link from the hidden footer to the main page architecture, they multiplied their SEO traffic by 100 times almost overnight.
A 100x increase just by moving a link out of the footer.
Exactly. It's about removing friction for the machines. And speaking of removing friction, we have to talk about global scaling and internationalization.
Yeah, Facebook realized early on that they were too slow to internationalize.
Right. They were leaving massive global markets undefended, allowing clones like vContactA in Russia or Orkut in Brazil to rise rapidly.
But they couldn't just hire thousands of translators overnight.
No, the cost and logistics would be staggering. So they relied on structural engineering. They built a scalable translation infrastructure where their own bilingual users could suggest and vote on translations for the site.
It was crowdsourced.
Completely crowdsourced. And the result, they translated the entire Facebook interface into French in exactly 12 hours.
12 hours. That is incredible. But, you know, when we talk about all this optimizing, tweaking, internal links, building translation tools, aren't we just making the product better for our power users, the people who use it every day?
Actually, no. If we connect this to the bigger picture, optimizing for your power user is exactly backward if your goal is massive growth. The power user will figure it out. They were already retained. Growth teams must focus on the marginal user.
The marginal user, who is that?
It's the person balancing on a knife edge. The person who just signed up 10 minutes ago has 0 friends on the platform and hasn't received a single notification. They are experiencing maximum friction and 0 value. If it isn't immediately intuitive, they are gone. You have to build life rafts for the people who are drowning, not luxury cabins for the people who are already comfortably sailing.
Wow. Okay, so we've looked at the structural shifts, the infiltration, the retention, the distribution. Finally, how do you manage the chaos of all these forces happening at once? As a company scales, how do you keep everyone aligned?
This brings us to the operational insights from Sam Altman and Alex Schultz. And the absolute bedrock of alignment is the North Star metric. A company must have one singular metric that aligns every single employee.
eBay is the perfect example of this. If you ask someone what eBay's North Star was, they'd probably say revenue.
But it wasn't revenue. eBay's North Star was gross merchandise volume, or GMV, the total volume of goods moving through the site.
Because if a product manager's goal is just to increase revenue, they'll just raise the transaction fees on the sellers.
Exactly. It incentivizes extractive behavior. The sellers get angry, they leave, and the platform dies. But if the goal is GMV, everyone in the company knows their job is to ruthlessly remove friction from the transaction process. How do we make checkout faster? How do we attract more buyers? It creates total alignment when the CEO isn't in the room.
And once you have that alignment, you have to protect your momentum.
Momentum is the absolute lifeblood of a growing organization. Winning teams feel good and keep winning. But losing momentum, often by getting distracted by PR or what a competitor is doing, creates a death spiral. People get demoralized, top talent quits, and the product slows down even more.
It's so hard to pull out of that stall.
It really is. And as you scale, you hit one final operational hurdle: writing the law.
Because oral tradition fails.
Exactly. When a company scales past roughly 50 people, you can't just turn your chair around and ask the founder how things are done. You must write down how you do things, your process, and why you do things, your culture, or chaos ensues.
And bringing this directly to you, the listener, whether you are running a startup, managing a team in a massive corporation, or just organizing a community project, you need a North Star metric and a tight feedback loop to maintain momentum.
You really do. Knowledge of these systems is only valuable when it's applied.
So to briefly recap the journey today, we looked at leveraging the multi-trillion-dollar structural shift in enterprise software. We found the asymmetrical wedge, we agonized over the mathematics of the retention curve, and we built a ruthless SEO and distribution machine.
And this raises an important question, a final concept to mull over. If enterprise software continues to be entirely user-led, adopted via smartphone by individuals who demand a flawless consumer-grade experience, will the very concept of enterprise software eventually cease to exist?
That's a fascinating thought.
Are we moving toward a world where the software you use to manage your personal life and the software you use to run a billion-dollar supply chain are essentially indistinguishable?
The boundaries really are dissolving. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Tomorrow, I want you to look at the software you use and ask yourself, what is their magic moment and what is their North Star? Keep diving deep.